Dear Robert Martin, roses are red, violets are blue. It would be a degradation if my friend were to be with you. Love from Emma Woodhouse. Hi everyone, and welcome to my discussion video on Robert Martin in Jane Austen's Emma. I hope you're all well. I'm mainly going to be talking about Robert Martin and his rise throughout the novel, and how a tenant farmer is important to society, and a farmer holds the same values and actions as a landowner, in this case Mr Knightley, who is aware of his social responsibility. So the reason I started with that poem, or what it was actually a Valentine's card meme that I created a few years ago, was because I think essentially that is where it all begins in Emma for Robert Martin, when Emma thinks Robert Martin isn't good enough for her friend Harriet Smith. And if Emma were to write Harriet's letter of refusal, I think this would be it. It would be witty and charming, but more seriously, it includes her unlikable snobbery. She says this at one point: "But a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore in one sense as much above my notice as in every other he is below it." So to begin, if you think about Jane Austen's central figures, most, if not all, go through a transformation or some sort of awakening. For example, in Pride and Prejudice, Mr Darcy did. As the title defines, he is full of pride, but we get the satisfactory conclusion of seeing him become more open and adding to the importance of social community, and him realizing that status alone isn't enough. Emma, if it were not for Mr Knightley, is well on her way to turning into some of the most selfish characters of Jane Austen's novels, like General Tilney, Lady Catherine and the Bingley sisters. Mr Gardiner was a sensible, gentlemanlike man, greatly superior to his sisters as well by nature as education. The Netherfield ladies would have had difficulties in believing that a man who lived by trade within view of his own warehouses could have been so well bred and agreeable. That is what Emma thinks about Robert Martin. Robert Martin is a farmer who is in trade, and she can't even fathom that he could be agreeable, sensible, worthy of her friend. She thinks he is vulgar, barbaric. She says he only thinks of profit and loss, and all those horrible things. But when I was reading Emma for the first time in 2023, and that is actually, I've only read it once actually, this is what I put in my notes. I'm so glad to read a different perspective on Robert Martin. And this was the part in Emma when we get to hear Mr Knightley's praises and approval of Mr Martin when he is having an heated discussion with Emma. But what I didn't know then, and neither did Emma, is that Mr Knightley's thorough regard for Robert Martin predicts the rise of the tenant farmer, as said by Alistair M. Duckworth. And Jane Austen tells us the importance of Robert Martin through Mr Knightley. When Emma visits Donwell Estate, It's not only followed by her discovery of a hidden love for Mr Knightley and the consequent acceptance of the values he upholds, but by her admission that now it would be a great pleasure to know Robert Martin. We will get into the similarities between Mr Knightley and Robert Martin, but one of the other ways Jane Austen did this was through the descriptions of the view from Donwell of the Abbey Mill farm. What she does with this is tells us and Emma to include what she had previously excluded from her view, that her honest pride for Donwell must also belong to Abbey Mill farm and the people that come with it. There are a couple of quotes I'd like to highlight because of the choice of words and vocabulary. One of them is, the first one is, there had been a time also when Emma would have been sorry to see Harriet in a spot so favourable for the Abbey Mill farm, but now she feared it not. It might be safely viewed with all its appendages of prosperity and beauty, its rich pastures, spreading flocks, orchard in blossom, and light column of smoke ascending. And the other is, at half a mile distance was a bank of considerable abruptness and grandeur, well clothed with wood, and at the bottom of this bank, favourably placed and sheltered, rose the Abbey Mill farm, and the river making a close and handsome curve around. The use of vocabulary to describe Abbey Mill farm exemplifies Robert Martin's situation and character. For example, nouns like prosperity, appendages, as well as being favourably placed. Mr Knightley, in his eyes, if you think about Robert Martin in Mr Knightley's eyes, he is favourably placed. But also the noun appendages, he is attached to Mr Knightley and Donwell estate, which leads to prosperity. I mean, even Emma said that he will be very rich in the future. I mean, it's a guarantee he will be a successful farmer. Mr Knightley is our steady, sensible figure throughout the novel and remains the reader's rational point of reference. And the similarities between Martin and Knightley are subtly drawn. The first similarity is Mr Knightley is a man of the outside. He's on his farm, on his way about parish business, and is aware of his responsibilities as a landowner. Robert Martin is also no idle man. He's with his farm and his library and all the parish to manage. I mean, I know a lot of these quotes regarding Robert Martin are taken out of context. For example, this one. But you can see in the novel, and what Jane Austen is showing us is they are both exactly the same, and both of them know they have a duty to be active in their role. But what was life like for tenant farmers of that time? I read an essay on the mobility of tenant farmers in 1700 to 1850, and it said sitting tenants possessed established business contracts and specialist knowledge of the idiosyncrasies of the farm soil, both of which would take a newcomer time to achieve. And I wondered, do they have the same equal knowledge as a landowner? Will this give them latent opportunity to own the farm themselves And there was. The main reasons why a successful farmer decided to relocate were because he wanted to move up the agricultural ladder, either into own occupation or to a larger rented farm. In Pride and Prejudice, Bingley, who was formerly in trade, seeks landed security. Predictably is preeminently the mark of a gentleman, Alistair M. Duckworth says, and both Martin and Knightley are in the novel described as open and honest. There is no secrecy within their characters. Mr Knightley, an honest, trustworthy, generous landowner and neighbour, who is spoken of highly by all of Highbury, and as for Mr Martin, he has a very fine flock, and while she was with them, he had been bid more for his wool than anybody in his country, said Harriet Smith. His popularity with his wool shows his good sense and good principles, and it also shows that Robert Martin is a spirited agriculturist. He is not an amateur farmer who had been attracted to the industry by high prices of wartime. There is evidence of a rush of people like journalists, shopkeepers, even army officers running helter-skelter to be farmers during the wars. Rather than a single event, I researched that G.E. Mingley states that there were a profusion of agricultural revolutions, one for 2 centuries before 1650, another emphasizing the century after 1650, a third for the period 1750 to 1780, and a fourth for the middle decades of the 19th century. And now on to Robert Martin and Harriet Smith, who I love. When I was reading Emma, I decided to take notes and write down my thoughts and feelings of what was happening and the characters, and I really loved Harriet Smith and Robert Martin. I was obsessed with their relationship, and Robert Martin and Harriet Smith are the first couple to be married. Evidently, Jane Austen thought Mr Martin's happiness was important and deserving. His open and continuous love for Harriet, his resolution is a stamp of a hero in a novel. He doesn't play sport with Harriet like Frank Churchill does with Jane Fairfax, or even Bingley with Jane Bennet. Bingley, with all his likability and goodness, doesn't qualify as a hero. He is easily persuaded by his sisters and his friend Mr Darcy, and is convinced to believe Jane isn't in love with him. I say that, yet Jane Austen has a book called Persuasion, which I haven't read for a very long time. Robert Martin does so many romantic things for Harriet. I think the one that people remember the most is when Harriet says he had gone 3 miles round one day in order to bring her some walnuts, because she said she was fond of them. But the one I love the most, and the one I wrote down in my notes in my Storygraph reading journal, was when Harriet bumps into Robert Martin in the shop whilst she is sheltering from the rain. One of the things that make this scene so great is Harriet, because of her really chatty monologues. This is what I put every time I get to read about her, it brings a smile to my face. I'm really invested in Harriet and Mr Martin's happiness. This whole scene in chapter 3 where she gets caught in the rain and bumps into Robert Martin is out of a movie, and I put loads of heart emojis. The reason I love this scene so much is because his good-naturedness and manners is solidified in this scene, because this is after he had been rejected. Though he is wounded, he's well-meaning enough to advise Harriet with genuine feeling to not take a certain path that is floated by rain. Another great thing about this scene is Emma's thoughts. She feels uncomfortable that he has behaved so well. She doesn't understand it. She can't believe it even. She says something along the lines, he's probably only doing that to try get back into Harriet's good books or something like that. He behaves like a gentleman, or a gentleman farmer, as Mr Knightley calls him. The use of the word gentleman is significant. If we think about the word in Jane Austen's novels, such as in Pride and Prejudice, Lizzie says to Mr Darcy, "If only you had behaved as a gentleman." Mr Darcy was struck by this. He was taken aback. But why was he? Even Mr Darcy misunderstood the true meaning of what it means to be a gentleman. So to wrap it up neatly, I think that Jane Austen is telling us that actions are more important than the title, and that a farmer is an emblem of organic growth. That is the end of the video. I really want to thank you for watching. I want to thank Virtual Jane Con as well, which this video is a part of. My name is Anab, and I would love to know your thoughts on the topic, the rise of the tenant farmer, and your thoughts on Robert Martin and the book Emma in general.